Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to be going over how to make Kylo Ren's surcoat or his overcoat. Out of the pieces that you've made so far, this one should be a lot easier. It won't be the easiest, but it will be one of the easier ones, in my opinion, I think. Mostly because there's no pleating involved, and that was definitely an experience. There's a couple things I did want to talk about initially before going into it. I am also going to be fully lining it, as burlap is a lot looser and thinner weave opposed to a monk's cloth. If you use a monk's cloth, there will be some slightly different approaches you're going to take opposed to the way that I'm doing it. If you end up using burlap, which is a cheaper option opposed to monk's cloth, and more readily available, you'll be able to follow what I'm going to do in the video a lot more closely than if you actually go with the screen accurate monk's cloth. Monk's cloth and burlap are pretty close. On a close-up inspection, you will be able to tell the difference. Insert photos of monk's cloth and burlap. As you can see, there is a bit of a visual difference between the two fabrics. However, either one could work. Either one will serve the purpose that you're trying to portray. They both have the same kind of drape and feel to them. Even if you use a monk's cloth, you might still want to go with a lining, because depending on the reference images that we see from the movie, and I've gone through and watched every scene with Kylo Ren in it walking around, there is suggestion that there is a lining layer to his costume that is sometimes sewn to the coat and sometimes separate from it. So for me, I'm just going to sew the lining directly to the coat and skip doing a whole bunch of extra hemming, because I hate hemming. It's really annoying, and I can't very well do very clean hemming lines, so I'm going to attach the lining to my surcoat. If you want to go with the lining not attached to the surcoat, there will be also some different construction techniques that you're going to use. I would suggest, if you're newer to the sewing stage, to not separate the lining and the surcoat, to make them as one garment instead of two. That's just my input. Without any further ado, let's get into sewing. Alrighty then, so you're going to get your overcoat or your surcoat pattern. You're going to place it down on top of your burlap, pin it to your burlap, and cut out 4 panels. On my actual pattern itself, I left out about 1 inch or so of seam allowance throughout the entire piece. It's so that way if the burlap ends up fraying, then I can trim it off and it's not going to disrupt the actual size of the core pattern itself. Alright, now we're going to cut out the lining. So you're going to take your pattern again, place it out on your lining fabric, which would just be a plain black cotton, and pin it down, and then cut out 4 panels. Now that your pattern pieces are all cut out, you're going to take a marker and mark out on the fabric where the waist is on all of the pieces. Then you're going to pin the shoulders together and the sides and the back, and leave the front open. And then try it on. Alright, so I have pinned together the lining. So you can see it looks pretty cool. So after this, you're going to pin together your outer Surcoat fabric because you've already pinned the lining down. I made the armholes a little too small, so I'm going to have to make the armholes bigger. Then you're going to sew the shoulder seams and the side seams and the back seam of both the outer fabric and the lining fabric. Now that you have your lining all sewn together and your burlap all sewn together, we're going to do the same thing we did with your under tunic, and you're going to take all of your open edges and you're going to pin it to your outside fabric. So it's going to be all seams pinned together, and because of the tails being different in this one where it's 4 tails instead of 2, you're going to pin all tails together, making sure that all of your seams match up, everything fits properly, and then you are going to stitch it all together. Now that everything is all pinned together, you're going to sew along only the outside line. So only the outside are you going to sew, and I would suggest doing a zigzag stitch like you did before with the just the burlap when you were sewing the burlap together, because burlap does tend to fray, and I want to make sure beyond any shadow of any doubt that it stays together. You don't want to be at a convention or at wherever you plan to wear this costume and move wrong and then have a portion of your costume rip open. It will not be fun. I've been at conventions, been at places where my costume fell apart, my friends' costumes fell apart while at the convention. I've also met people and had to help them fix their costumes, so like the best thing to do is reinforce as much as you can before getting to your convention, because you don't want to fall apart while you're at the convention. Kylo Ren is already an emotional mess. You don't need to make his costume a mess too. Alright, now that you've got all of your seams all sewed up and finished, we are going to invert the costume, pull it through, and get it right side out with all internal seams facing inward. Reaching through the neck hole that you have left open, all the way to the end of your tails. There should be 4 of them. You're going to simply just pull it through and make sure that your corners are pointy. If you have to reach back in and push them from the inside, then that is completely acceptable. And just repeat the process all 4 times. your seams are turned in, and you've got a nice clean look on the inside and the outside. Your very next step is to run a single stitch line across the top and all around the neckline, and then also to run all around your armholes. Then you're going to run a stitch on the outside of the entire fabric as close to the end as you can get it, making sure that your seam is pulled tightly, so each match, without the lining showing from the underneath. And then you're just going to sew a thin line as closely as possible to the edge as you can possibly get it. Just a very thin, straight stitch all the way around the entire garment. And that will make it to where you don't get this really like baggy look. I don't know how burlap would react to being ironed down. And I also wanted to make sure that all of my seams were 100% together and they weren't going to fray apart, and I wasn't going to get any surprises while at my convention. Alright, so to finish the seam for the sleeve, you're simply going to take a bit of fabric and fold it over and sew it down with a single straight stitch. The lovely thing about burlap is you can't see the stitches on top. So it looks like you just have a clean edge but invisible seams without the need of actually making invisible seams. Alright, so originally I had made my pattern too wide at 4 inches, so I simply folded it in half and I kept the same width. So I went with 2 inches instead of 4 for the height of the collar, because initially I was going to fold it in half, but burlap is very rough against my skin, so I'm using the same cotton fabric that I used for lining everything else as what's going to line my collar, and then burlap on the outside. So you're going to cut out 2 of your lining using your collar pattern, and then you're going to cut out 2 of the same size of burlap. For all of these, I just used the leftover fabric pieces that I had and just found ones that were big enough for me to cut out the size in. So now you're going to sew these 2 together, and then you're going to sew these 2 together, and then lining up this seam with this seam, you're going to sew these together, making sure that all of your outer seams are on the same side. You're then going to sew along this side and this side. Then you are going to turn it right side in, so that way you have the finished seam on the outside. So after sewing down your external seam, you are going to tuck under the raw edge of your lining, and you are going to pin it down to the lining on the inside, and you're going to take a thin stitch and stitch at the very bottom. If you have any excess collar sticking out, fold the raw edges under and turn it in, pin it down, and sew it down. So you're going to take a marker and you're going to mark out on the fabric where you want to place your Velcro, both on this side and the side that's going to overlap over top of that. So you can see the little marks I have made on the fabric where I am going to sew each side of my Velcro strip. So there is a positive and negative side of each piece of Velcro. One side should be very scratchy and very plasticky, and the other side should be much softer and brushier. Make sure that one side of your fabric contains only 1/2 of your Velcro, and that the contrasting side contains the other kind, or the other half of your Velcro. So you'd want to make sure that your more plasticky side is always on this side of your fabric, or on this side, whichever one, and on the contrasting side, you would only have your very bushy one. Because otherwise, a bushy side will not stick to another bushy side. It's a positive and negative effect. So one will only stick to its opposite side. It will not stick to the same one like it. Thanks for watching this tutorial. This project took me about in total an entire day to complete this particular jacket. I think it was in a lot of ways easier than the sleeves and the undertunic, mostly because I wasn't doing something I hadn't really ever done before. I've done pleating before, but not to the extent of this or the jacket I'm wearing underneath of this. Congratulations to you guys if you've been building along with this series. We are now over halfway done. The only thing left to make for the actual costume itself is the hood and the belt. This is just a piece of fabric that I keep tying around myself. So we're almost done with this. So yeah, stay tuned for next video when I go over how to make the hood and the cape bit. And yeah, see you next time.